fires in upper level structures, lower level structures. So, depending on the edge of the building, depending on building code, stuff like that, you're gonna have standpipes, and sometimes those standpipes are gonna be required. Usually they're required 3 stories or higher, and that all depends on what building code you follow, stuff like that. So, if you don't have a standpipe or in the lack of standpipes, you're gonna go through your main entrance, go up the closest stairway to the fire, check your extension below the fire before you get up there. Get additional personnel is gonna be required, cause you're gonna have to haul a lot of hose. You know, if you're going up 3 stories, there's a lot of hose, you know. So, get all the kinks, get all the bends out, get a nice free flow. Depending on the location of the standpipe, depends on what else you can do. If that standpipe is in a protected location, you just need 1 or 2 sections of 50-foot hose, up to 100, you know, whatever it needs to reach that fire. Make your connection, do your job. You know, if it's not a protected standpipe or in a protected stairwell, you go back to the upper level and run it down. You know, when you're dealing with stuff like that too, you know, obviously we can't, you know, we can't use elevators to transport personnel, but we can use elevators to transport what? Equipment. You know, because if equipment gets stuck in an elevator, you know, it says you can use to transport fire crews, but not to the fire floor. You know, I don't feel safe transporting on an elevator in a structure that is on fire. Sorry. I just go ahead and walk up those steps. It's not like I couldn't use the exercise. Be willing and be able to do large scale evacuations. Below ground. Probably one of the most difficult and dangerous fires we deal with when we're dealing in structure fires. Why?
If you're going down the chimney.
Yes,
with
you
stairs.
are. It's hot. You're having impingement on the structure that you're walking to get to the stairwell. You know, residential wise, you're looking at entertainment rooms, living quarters, you know, you could have utility spaces for storage and HVAC and stuff like that, so, you know, sometimes you got garages, you know, like Chris's garage would technically be a lower level, however, that is, you know, accessible from the street, you open up the garage door and it's right there, but, you know, he does have living quarters above his garage. We have what's called fuel loading happening with structures like with lower level structures, lower level fires and structures. Especially the fuel load on the floor above it. You're gonna be dealing with, you know, age of the exposed joist. If it's an unfinished basement, unfinished dwelling, you have exposed joists, you don't have the safety of drywall to slow it down. You're gonna have hidden paths in there, you're gonna have air ducts and stuff like that that's gonna help travel heat. We've talked about it when we talked about construction, about lightweight construction, and it makes it successful for rapid collapse because it just doesn't last as long when it's been impinged upon on fire. A lot of basements that weren't made to be dwellings are being converted into dwellings. Get that initial size up done in the base for the basement. Especially important because they're extremely dangerous. You're, like you said, you're trying to go down the chimney is basically what you're doing. Basements basement fires weaken the main floor of a structure, creating a constant danger and danger of collapse. Right there's a UL picture, or a NIST picture actually. But you can see the kitchen floor is gone. A lot of weight on that kitchen floor. Refrigerators, stoves, cabinetry, stuff like that. Sounding the floor when you're going to work a basement fire, or using a TIC or a TI, to try and make sure it's safe to walk on, but may not be sufficient. Terrell fire that we did in town. We were walking across the floor and the fire was mainly out, we were just doing extension. Walked across the floor and I was sounding the floor and it sounded pretty good, and I got to a certain spot and I could feel the bend in the floor, you know? So, and I know we had fire in the basement, cause I kept trying to convince them Spirit Lake guys that they needed to go down there, and I kept getting called crazy. Just get down there! No, it's hot! And get out of the way. Spray water and get out of the way. Thermal imagers will not always provide an accurate assessment of structural integrity of the floor system. Why is that? Depends on the amount of damage, depends on the products used, you know. Depends on what structure's still actually there. So, they help, but they may not give you the entire picture. Other considerations, enclosed stairwells, gonna act as a flow path, we talked about it, you're just climbing the chimney, or you're going down the chimney. 1.5 inches, 1 3/4 may not be enough. You may have to pull a 2.5 to the stairwell and just crack her open. You need enough to overcome the cooling and the venting of the gases. Try and get some ventilation. If it's livable space down there, what's it gotta have? Required.
Egress windows.
Second point of egress, egress window. Situation like my house, I have 2 stairwells. Granted, they're all 7 feet apart, but I have 2 stairwells. I have access from the house and I have access from my garage. It's half finished, half livable quarters in my basement, so, but I don't have egress windows. So I got that second point of egress through stairwells. It doesn't count. I can't consider the room down there a bedroom, but. We're gonna deal with them when we're dealing with commercial buildings. Situation like this, 3 floors above, 7 floors below. Dealing with subflooring joists, whether it's metal or it's wood. I got wood that's being impinged on, it's gonna deteriorate obviously. Metal, if it gets so hot, it's gonna have issues. So let's talk about exposure protection, controlling building utilities, stuff like that. So when we're talking about exposures on the inside, the best way we can do to protect exposures on the inside, close doors, close any other openings. Keep everything away from the fire area that's not affected. Use proper tactical ventilation, get the smoke out of there, keep the movement limited. we call it passive forms of exposure protection. Stuff that should be already in the building itself. Most commercial buildings that have occupants inside are gonna have these. What are they?
Sprinklers,
Sprinklers,
fire doors,
fire doors,
alarm systems.
yep, alarm systems, firewalls. Anything that can help prohibit fire and smoke movement would be a passive system. So basically create a compartment so that it can't get out. Exterior wise, any people that are in the path, either would be in the path, I'm not really sure. Any parked vehicles or, you know, if you've got rail system, railroad cars, that would be an issue, get those out of the way. If you got some piled storage, some stuff that's just stacked up, you know, got forklifts there, bobcats. Use that equipment. If you've got somebody who's trained and knows how to use those. Hog confinements, you guys, everybody's got a hog confinement, right? They're all connected, right? That's the way to help from going from building A to building B, is take out the pathway. There's usually a bobcat on scene, right? Usually got a bobcat there for something, right? You can get in that bobcat, take that pathway out, clear it out of the way. That'll help you with your exposure. Relocate fire apparatus, so it doesn't get burned up. And that doesn't go for just commercial buildings and residential buildings, but you'll learn in wildland fires as well. Make sure you don't park your apparatus in the green. Spirit Lake. Right out there, so I just throw that out there, Spirit Lake. Yes, they lost their pickup because they parked it in the green. I do believe Bubba watched it go. You'll have to ask him about it sometime. Bubba, the guy that taught you guys how to tie ropes and knots, yeah, I do believe he was on the pumper on a wildland fire and watched it just come screaming up to that pickup, and there wasn't a thing he could do. He watched it just come up underneath of it and just engulfed it, so. So controlling buildings, utilities. So we have different types of sources. And on the electricity side, when we're dealing commercial wise, when we're dealing residential wise, we're gonna be dealing with either commercial power company or some type of alternative power. Those could be solar panels, wind generators, fuel power generators. We need to get those disconnected from the fire structure. Can we, as a department member, pull a meter? No. We cannot pull a meter. Is it appropriate to do so? Yes. But we shouldn't do it. Usually if you have a confirmed structure fire, comm center's job is to call power company and utilities. Get them there. Get it shut off somehow.
Yeah, our one of the power linemen is on the fire department, so
Then
for
you
the
can-
city, so
then go right ahead.
technically we can pull it.
Go ahead and pull your meter, go right ahead. Yep, you can go right ahead and pull that meter then, cause you have the ability, you have the trained people.
If you can't get to that, then what's the next best thing? At the pole?
Yeah, if they can't get to the meter, go to the pole, disconnect.
Cause I could see a situation where that's just smoked up and you can't get it.
Yeah, you can't get to it, then yeah, it's
Can't
gotta
get
be
it.
shut off from the next next shut-off point.
Some of the older houses, the meters were in the basement too.
Mhm.
Yep.
I think a lot of that's been switched over, but.
So, that's why I asked. There was actually a question in there, so. Alternative measures, we've talked about panels, in fact, Arnold Park did a training on it one night. As the book will tell you, they usually have two shut-off switches. Mike's yours has two, does it not?
No,
Yours just has the one.
just says one, but it's because it's got microinverters on it.
Right.
So if it didn't, if your inverter's on the house or by the house, then it has to have two,
It has to have two.
one on each side of the inverter.
Jose, yours has two.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the one at Cozumel has both batteries.
Sub.
Mine's just not.
And like I said, so those shut-offs are gonna be one on each side of the inverters.
The important thing to remember on panels is that if they don't have the microinverters, which a lot of systems don't have the little inverters on each back of the panel, as long as the sun is shining, they're putting power out to,
Yes, and it
to that
actually,
shut-off.
it actually says that. In fact, it
And it's
is
gonna be high
right
volt,
there.
it's gonna be high voltage.
Yeah, solar panels generate current whenever there's a light source. Sunlight, moonlight, artificial lighting are always being generated, are always energized.
Can't shut them off.
So what are those put out to the inverter, 600 volt?
They're, well, it depends how many you have on a string. I think the maximum that they can put on is 600, or, I think for a commercial system it's 600 volts, for a residential it's 300 to the inverter, per string. A lot. They're about 30 to 40 volts per panel.
And that goes out as DC voltage and then the inverter switches it over to
AC to,
AC.
yeah.
correct?
And on mine, it's got an inverter on each panel, so the power actually coming to the house is all AC already, 240 volt AC.
Money like 800 on mine.
800 volts.
Light it up, Jose.
Do you have some sort of transfer switch on them then? So you can go from power company
No,
to your
no.
solar panel, or you just straight solar panel?
Straight into the circuit panel,
Well, whatever you don't use
goes onto the line.
goes onto the line, and then your meter just,
Yep, but those all those inverters are set up so that if the power goes out to the house, the inverter shuts off.
So they're not backfeeding. the
Right,
inverter.
there's no brownout capability.
They only pay you the cost differential though, right?
Depends, some of the utilities do a payment for like a bulk price, like 2 cents a kilowatt hour, or 2.5, and then, Alliant, like I'm hooked into, is net metering, so it just, you get kilowatt hour for kilowatt hour back, so you get full price back.
Sure.
wind turbines, if you're dealing with those, that turn-off's gonna be at the meter box, the main power's shut off. Same thing with those. You can shut it off at the box, but remember that line from the turbine to the box is still a line. Yeah. Fuel power generator, best and easiest way to deal with that is to do what? Just shut it off, just walk over and turn it off, you know? Can't necessarily shut the fuel off, because, like, Milford has a generator in back, it's a dual fuel. Has two fuels on it. The reason being that happened was, when they built that station, they had some discussions. So they contacted, what was the east side of the state, they got decimated by a tornado back in 2008, 2009.
Parkersburg?
Parkersburg. So they contacted Parkersburg. Said, you know, if you could change something, or, you know, what would you do better to protect your community? Well, tornado ravaged the community. What's the first thing utility companies come in and do?
Gas off.
Shut everything off. Power got shut off, gas got shut off. Natural gas got shut off. What was running the generator?
Natural gas.
Natural gas. Milford, knowing that, because of the research they did, turned theirs into a dual fuel. I don't remember what it was. The one talk is they were gonna have a dual fuel with diesel. So that if it happened, natural gas got shut off, they could just have a diesel truck brought up and just run it off of diesel fuel. So if it's a single fuel off of natural gas, yeah, just shut, you know, you can shut the gas off to it. That's ability, but if not, yeah, just.
Well, I've
shut it.
seen wires melt together and we were demoing out a old Odin generator and the wires melted together as I was pulling it out of the transfer switch. And
Really?
that got interesting real fast.
Oh, I bet, yeah. Gas company wise, gas utilities, you know, we all have the ability to shut off gas, whether you're using a specific wrench or, your spanner wrench usually has that nice fitting right on it. For the old style, some of the newer ones, they're a little bit bigger, so you can't necessarily use a spanner wrench, but, you know, an adjustable style wrench will work. Things with natural gas to remember is it's non-toxic. Okay? But we label it as an asphyxiant because it'll displace oxygen, so it displaces your normal breathing, but in a confined space. How do we know that we have a natural gas leak? What do we smell? Rotten eggs, because of a chemical they add to it called mercaptan. That's what gives it that smell. If you need to, you can always have the meter shut off, or the gas company shut it off from the main box. Basically states that natural gas that leaks underground in wet soil can lose its odorant and become more difficult to detect without the instruments. So anytime you deal with any type of gas leak, always call your gas company. You know, how often do you guys check your gas meters? Once every year? You know? Those guys are checking them, I think, like once a week. So, they got the ability to drive a stake down into the ground and do below ground checks and stuff like that, so. LPG, liquefied petroleum gas. It's about 1.5 times heavier than air, so what's it gonna do? It's going to sink. We talked about, explosive rates. LPG's, its explosive rate is 1.5 and 10%. Best way to take care of it is to shut it off at the tank. Just go out to the tank and shut it off. When it leaks, it does have a visible cloud, so it's easy to see. In order to dissipate that cloud of unburned gas, fog stream. 100 gallons a minute, fog stream. If you have one that's on fire, and you might learn this in hazmat. If you have an LP tank that is on fire, it's a good thing or a bad thing? It's a good thing. Why?
Yes.
Because you know where the gas is on, and where it's leaking out, and you know it's burning off. If you have fire impingement on an LP tank, that gun, and just deluge it. You have to flow, I believe it's 500 gallons a minute for every point of impingement. And the point of impingement is the size of a football on an LP tank, to keep it cool enough to not to explode. So we don't get near it. You get a deck gun, get it as close as you can, and just deluge it. Do your best to keep it cool. So that's what happened with the Albert City explosion.
They had a pop-off valve not work too, didn't they?
Yeah, there was a lot more that went on in there, and pop-off valves and everything else, but yeah, that was many years ago. They lost 2 guys in that one from the explosion. Water, if you needed to shut the water off, shut it off from the street side if you can find it. best thing is just call your water utility guys, they know where the shut-offs are at. So, I mean, how many fire departments do we know that carry city shut-off keys? Or curb shut-off keys? Milford does, and that's only because they've got the Wapton water guys on the department. So, one ended up coming from Wappet to the fire station. So, but who does water here in Okoboji? Neil?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if Neil knew it was something that needed to be done, we just call Neil, he's on the department. He could easily do it, he probably knows where the shut-offs are at, Arnold's Park. Fire protection systems. Connected to an FDC or a fire department connection, that's usually what they look like. You'll know if you've got them, they're usually in the front of the building. Easy to find. Know what size connection you need to hook to them though. As you can see, this one up here, it's responsible for floors 1 through 14. Looks like 2.5 inch connections. Control valve is the middle one. That's for your sprinkler system. It's the only way the water can be shut off from those. Through that control valve. And then the third one is stopping the flow from a sprinkler. Do we have a sprinkler prop?
Sprinkler what?
Sprinkler prop.
I think so.
Okay. Let's see if I can't get a hold of one. One of the, or one of the test points or things that you may have to do is to be able to shut one off. So you have a sprinkler head, you have a sprinkler head that's running water, and you have to be able to shut it off to stop the flow of water out of it completely. We use 2 wooden wedges. Just take 2 wood wedges, just like he is, and basically just completely enclose it, stop the water flow. Any point in time that you've got control valves that you need to have open or closed, should have a member standing there with the radio so that if one needs to be open or closed, that it can be done without having to run up and down steps or down to the basement or whatever. Part of this too, knowing those valves. So that one in the middle is an OS and Y, which is an outside stem and yoke valve. You got post indicator valves or PIVs, wall indicator, wall post indicator valves. This is all on 1028. Wouldn't be a bad idea to understand the differences in the different types of shut-off valves. Master streams. Master streams are gonna get deployed when because we need something that's beyond the effectiveness of hand lines. There's a need for a fire stream in areas that are unsafe for firefighters to go to. They can be used in direct fire attacks, we can use them in indirect fire attacks. We can use them as supplements for hand lines that are already attacking the fire from the exterior. And one of the great things about them is they can provide exposure protection as well. Master streams are effective on water, put an effective stream on the fire just because of the amount of water that they run at a time. You're talking 2 2.5s running through a master stream on a deck gun when it's deployed. nothing less than 2. You can use 1 to begin with, just to get it set up till you get the other line done. If you've got one of the big fancy ones that can put a 3rd line to it, put a 3rd line to it. It's gonna use a lot of water. You got a 1250 pump and you got three lines running to it. You probably come real close to running 1250 through that thing with the right nozzle on it. Remember, if you're putting water on a master stream on 2nd floor, 3rd floors, it's a lot of extra water weight. Water weighs about 8.2 pounds per gallon. So you have a greater potential for structural collapse because of that extra water weight. Staffing it, when we're setting it up, takes 2 people. Once it's set up, however, 1 person is effective. Obviously, if it's in a hazardous position, then we probably don't want anybody with it. Most of those deck guns, that style right there, have a leash to them that is tied to the front. So if you can bury something in front of it to anchor it to, because what happens when you start flowing water out that, if you don't anchor it down, which way is it gonna wanna go? It's gonna wanna go backwards, it's gonna wanna push away. So you need to be able to anchor it down. So it's got, you can kinda see it on the outside. There's 4 feet that deploy out. They've got pin stakes on them, so they will sit to the ground and kinda hold it from sliding anywhere in grass and mud. Obviously on concrete, not so much. You know, whatever you can anchor it to in front of it, if you need to in a situation where it's gonna be hazardous. And you should, even if it's just gonna be manned by 1 person, anchor it down. Don't try and put it, remember the curl we talked about with the 2.5, if you're gonna man a 2.5 by yourself. We talked about the curl, you can sit on the curl, don't do it with that and walk away, think it's gonna work. It'll take off, it takes off people's helmets and they get really upset. Got my helmet torn right off, because somebody thought that would work, so. Elevated master streams. They work great for upper story, multi-level buildings. Full a lot of water. They can be manned if you need to, or unmanned. If you're just gonna be flowing water all night out of it, don't necessarily need somebody up on top of it. But it's fun to stand up there and watch. So ours remote controlled? Or do you have to be in the seat?
Ours?
Yeah,
Seat,
you have to be in the seat.
seat or up top.
Seat up top, okay. Some of them are remote controlled, so like, Spirit Lake's got just a stick, and theirs is remote controlled, so they can walk around the building with it, with the joystick, and control what the stream to where it goes and everything else, so. But they don't have the ability to sit, so like ours has the seat next to it, you can sit into it and do the same thing. Class C fires. Class C fires are what kind?
Electrical,
What type of electrical?
5.
Energized.
Energized. We often fail to recognize that if it's energized or not. So that's a danger to us. So when doing that, we don't necessarily take the proper precautions or the appropriate steps for self-protection. Once it's turned off, those fires may just go off themselves because they don't have the heat to them anymore. And then again, they may not. Once the power's turned off and they're no longer electrical energized fires, what do they become? Class A or B, depending on what's burning. You're gonna find these type of fires in anywhere from substations to relay stations, railroad lines, the third rail is what they would classify that in the railroad. Vehicles, hybrid vehicles, computer server rooms, stuff like that. Before initiating any fire suppression, make sure you stop the flow of electricity to the device involved. We're gonna use such things as clean extinguishing agents, Halotron, Halon, stuff like that. Dry chemical, multi-purpose dry chemicals. Those are the best things to use. Bad part about those is they need what? Once they've been dumped, you have a big mess. But would I rather have a fire or a mess to clean up? I'd rather have a mess to clean up. They're all, water's inappropriate in those because of what?
Conductive.
It's conductive. A bad conductive, but it's conductive. So, anybody know what the voltage line is? A minimum voltage for it to be conductive? If you have this,
50 volts.
40. According to the book, it's 40.
OSHA says 50.
NFPA says it's 40. Let them argue about it. They argue about everything else anyway, so.
All I know is I'm legally required to lock something out if it's 50 volts or above.
50 volts or above. If we've gotta use water, what's the best way to do it? From and using a log bag. Reduce the risk of shock by current on the ground, so we're gonna cordon off a circle radius equal to the distance between the power poles from the line contacts the earth. The ground cover starts on fire, just leave it till it gets far enough away. Then you go ahead and extinguish it if you so need to. Usually an extinguisher will do it, it's gonna be grass. So, what's something else that we don't talk about a lot, that we'll talk a little bit about it when we get into wildland fires. What's something when you're dealing with grass fires that you can use other than water? That you wouldn't think?
Leaf blower?
Leaf blower. You get one of those steel backpack blowers.
That's what we use for our, like,
APO's
for our
got,
CRP burns.
you get two of them, just one, but it's also got, it's got a foam attachment to it, doesn't it? Or used to.
Oh, ours aren't back there, they're just ones you can.
There used to be an attachment that was put on to blow foam out of it. So, yeah, them steel leaf blowers are, whoever came up with that, that's the best way to do it. You guys got one?
I don't know if we ever.
Yeah, we've got like 2 backpacks and they're just like a handheld
Yeah.
It's really nice for sweeping out the
wash bay.
Wash bay.
wash bay.
It's nice for us.
Hey, sweep the floor.
Multiple uses.
They work great on electrical fires, cause you're just gonna blow it out. And obviously for maximum safety, the only people that's gonna cut the power to is gonna be your utility guys. I ain't going anywhere near it. I've seen videos of what happens when somebody touches that and is grounded. Toast.
I
Charred.
watched it's a Facebook video, so I don't know how true it is, but a guy brought in was testing bunker gear on how conductive it was.
I haven't seen that one.
It was letting out pretty good art.
Was it? one main one I've seen is a guy down in like Indonesia or something, that's standing on top of a train, and they run up the power lines overhead, and he was messing around and lost balance a little bit and reached up and grabbed and made contact with the power line and the train at the same time, and he just toast.
Well, you ever seen electrical systems in Indonesia? They're a mess anyway.
Always assume that power line's energized until the power company tells you otherwise. Transformer fires are relatively common. Although I've never seen them, forgot where they are. Some of the older ones have a health hazard to them, environmental hazard, because they contain what's called a PCB, a polychlorinated biphenyls. It's a liquid that's flammable and it's a cancer causer as well. Most of those are supposed to be being phased out, but even some of the newer ones still have a little bit in them anyway. Best way to take care of those is what?
Let 'em burn.
Burn or dry chem. Yeah. Pole top transformers, what are we gonna do with those? Burn. I ain't shooting water up there, let that boy burn. It ain't going anywhere. What's he gonna do, burn down the pole? Oh, well, utility guy's gotta put a new pole up, whoopee-dee. Underground transmission lines. Danger for us, cause we don't necessarily know they're there, other than the vault. The vault is a close confinement, so only trained personnel get to go in. In a situation like that, we're gonna maintain a 300-foot radius from that area. And there's that, only trained personnel in confined space entry should enter. High voltage installations, you need to know what you're talking about, what you're doing with them. I'm not even sure I can name anything around here that's got those, other than, you guys wouldn't even have those, do you?
Yeah, we got 4160.
Yeah.
Most incoming lines to the towns are at least 4160.
Substations, stuff like that. There's some Polaris, probably got something
Yeah,
like that.
hospitals usually have 480 going to them.
Good.
Most of your commercial will have 480 3-phase with a bunch of dry tech transformers inside to knock them down.
The book actually says it's required a current of excess of 600, but I'd say 480 is more than sufficient to.
Yeah, that's so 600 below is low voltage, 600 to 5,000 is medium voltage, anything over 5,000 is considered high
High.
voltage.
Still, I was just gonna hurt.
Yeah.
You're gonna be a tingle, that's for sure. So if we gotta cut into a wall or anything, let's just make sure everything's shut off, electrical, gas. IC's gonna know that, cause it's been communicated with him.
So that's another thing, like on a hospital or something, you can't just pull the meter and the power's gonna be off. They have normally like CT meters, so
Yeah.
so they're not like a house meter, they'll have an actual disconnect at the,
So if you disconnect the meter, does the generator kick in?
yeah, cause they're on transfer switches.
So
So
there's
it's-
that problem anyway.
Well, not the meter when you cut the main power.
Yeah.
You'll still have power going to your transfer switch, even if the meter's pulled or not. It's just not reading the current.
Right.
The Heart Hospital in Sioux Falls, they've got backup generator, a generator, backup generator, and four different services come into that building, so.
And I understand why.
the chances of the power ever completely going out and the generator running are slim because they have 4 different services coming into the, but, yeah.
Sheldon Hospital has 2, and then 1 backup generator.
I'd be surprised if ours doesn't have something similar to that as well. Consequences of electrical hazards when we're doing suppression. Obviously cardiac arrest, heart stops, VFib, just an irregular heart rhythm. Respiratory arrest, you stop breathing, involuntary muscle contractions or seizure-like activities, paralysis, burns, surface and internal. So remember, when you get electrocuted, it's because you completed a current, right? So if it went in somewhere, it had to go out somewhere. So depending on where it went in and where it went out, depends on what it went through to get to that. Ultraviolet arc burns to your eyes. That would be similar to welding burns,
Worse.
worse. I did have a buddy, guy I played ball with when I was growing up, that works for Thompson Electric. That in Sioux City, the meter blew right in front of
Yeah.
him. So,
It's not fun. Hearing on that too, the noise that
yeah, they
when an arc
exploded.
flash occurs is
Definitely.
like 200 decibels. It's insane.
Wow.
Yeah, you get bored, look up arc flashes on YouTube, you'll see.
You know what I do for a living, right? Boredom is my middle name at times. I get paid to sit there and wait.
There's a, so like arc flash gear and stuff for electricians, it's come a long ways in the last 15 years I've been in the trade.
Yeah.
When I first started, it was just put a piece of cardboard up there.
Yeah.
Now it's,
A whole lot different. So there's factors that, like I talked, electricity through the body, skin resistance, length of exposure, available current, available voltage. There's talking about that exclusion zone. From the point of contact, you go 1 span in every direction. Remember that a short circuit's gonna weaken other wires. We're in full PPE, insulated tool handles. Wait for the utility company, lockout tagouts. At least 10 feet away from the power line when raising or lowering ladders or aerial devices, so you don't get an arc jump. Don't touch a vehicle and apparatus that's in touch with the electrical wires. Solid or straight streams if you need to put a fire out in an energized equipment. You may not know it, but there may be live wires that are in contact with mesh fences or rail lines. The wires are down, heat any tingling sensation you felt in your feet and back away. Safety zone's gonna be very large. If you're inside a vehicle that comes in contact with a power line, stay inside of it. If you need to get out, you need to jump clear and make sure that both feet land together. You get into this ground gradient zone. Don't walk or crawl. Put your place and feet together, and hop or shuffle your area out of the area. Just stretch.